Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to the US, but we're going to head over to the state of Pennsylvania once again, and we're going to go to another brewery that has never featured on the channel before, and I've never tried anything from these guys either. But this brewery is highly recommended from someone that I know knows the Pennsylvania beer scene very, very well, and this is a beer that he said I really needed to review, so I will take him at his word for that. But the beer itself is a style that I've had many times before. It's a style that is very popular just now, and it's one of the kind of stronger subcategories within that style bracket, if we can call it that. But needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this one's going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to a little place called Williamsport, which is right in the centre of the state of Pennsylvania, and we're going to have a look at my first beer from Trail Brewing Company. So this particular beer is called Hammock. It comes in at 9% ABV, so it is a little bit of a monster, but this one is another New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA, and this one is single hopped with Citra, so you can't really go wrong with that actually. And it's supposed to be quite an oat heavy one as well, from what I understand. But this is yet another beer that was given to me by the wonderful Paul Romeli of PA Brew News, who's been going longer than me actually on YouTube, come to think of it. But yeah, he was telling me this is one that I really needed to do a proper sit-down review of, so that is what we're going to do. So a massive thank you to Paul for making this review possible. As I'll do with many of these reviews that he's made possible, I'll put the link to his channel in the video description below. So do make sure you go and give him a subscribe, show him some love, watch some of his videos. He is the most wonderful madman that you will ever meet. A massive metalhead, exactly 10 years older than me, and he's just really fun to hang about with actually. One of the most genuine people you will ever meet, and definitely cool to feature one of his kind of local breweries here on my channel as well. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see what it's going to have in store for us. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Trail Brewing Company. And we do have a number of cans to look at from these guys, but I'm not sure how many I'll be able to film, but you will see one or two more at least, hopefully. But yeah, you can go into the channel homepage as well and look for beer based on the geography tagging system. So just go in there, use the little search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever you like. If I've reviewed beers from your local area, they will pop up. Failing that, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the American playlist, along with a number of other things. And you can, of course, check out the playlist of beers from other countries as well. So make sure you do that. But we will see about adding more and more to the American playlist over the next little while. But let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you a wee bit for the first time about Trail Brewing Company. On to my brewery notes. So Trail Brewing Company, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Williamsport in central Pennsylvania, and this company was founded back in early 2018, and the main man behind it is Mike LaRosa, who had previously been a home brewer, and it was apparently his dad who really fostered his love of beer, and they started brewing together when he was 17 years old. But Mike was studying at Albright College, and apparently he applied to several breweries in the local area to start working there. But he eventually received an offer of an unpaid internship from Rock Bottom Brewing in King of Prussia, and he started there and very quickly made his way up to the position of assistant brewer. And this was under Brian McConnell. But upon graduation, he accepted the head brewer position for a newly started brewery called Saucony Creek Brewing Company before going on to support a number of startup breweries, and eventually he became the head brewer at Kane Brewing Company in Ocean in New Jersey. He went on to be the production and operations manager at Tired Hands in Ardmore, very close to Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. But yeah, he has a hell of a lot of experience and worked with a number of people in the industry, both in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. But Mike still runs his own consultancy firm that he formed during all of this work, which is called MJL Brewing Consultancy. But he wanted to start his own brewery and had done for a number of years. but New Trail was actually one of his clients, and the co-owners were restaurateurs. And at the time he was hired, the brewery was apparently called Williamsport Brewing. But at the end of his time working with these guys, he was offered equity in the company, and so he decided to jump at this because he really got on well with the other partners, and he felt that these guys were, you know, very moral people, and they knew a little bit more about the business side of things than he did. So New Trail Brewing opened originally in January of 2018, and it takes its name from the fact that Williamsport boasts some of the best hiking in Pennsylvania. But they've continued to develop new recipes over the last few years, and the brewery apparently operates a 60 American barrel brew house. So this is going to be somewhere in the region of, like, I think that's roughly about 3,000 litres per brew, maybe 3,500 litres per brew for those of you who don't use the Freedom Units measurements. But this 60 litre brew house that they have is for their main flagship beers, and they also have a smaller 15 barrel brew house for their special and seasonal releases. So this is probably in the region of, like, you know, 2,000-ish litres per brew. But they've got an on-site tap room as well where they have 12 beers on at a time, and they invite various food trucks and things like that from what I understand. And yeah, these guys have been very, very prolific over the last few years. So as of September 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced 298 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and that number will no doubt continue to increase as time goes on. But pardon me, yeah, that is everything I could really find on New Trail Brewing when I was trying to research a little bit about these guys. But yeah, they seem to have built up a very good reputation for themselves. They seem to be very popular, and of course the legendary Paul from PA Brew News recommended these guys. So yeah, this is a brewery that I really wanted to check out actually. So yeah, let's get on then and actually have a little look at this beer and see what it's all about. So, if you want to learn more about these guys, check out the brewery website, follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can, of course, check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages, and that'll tell you a little bit about all the different beers that these guys have done. But yeah, you can see the artwork on this one is pretty simple, but I think really nicely done. There you can see the New Trail symbol. It's like a kind of boot print thing with a kind of tree in the middle, which I think is pretty cool, and it's a plain silver top on the can there. I don't know if you get much in the way of like gold top cans and things in the US, but that seems to be quite a popular thing to do in Europe. But it's 473 millilitres, which is 1 American pint, 16 fluid ounces if you want to use the American Freedom Unit system, which to me makes absolutely no sense. But like we mentioned earlier, this one is a New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA, at 9% ABV. You could potentially argue that this is verging on triple IPA territory, but yeah, for me a triple IPA would be one that is over 10% actually. So yeah, probably is kind of firmly within the double IPA category. But like I said earlier, this one is supposed to be quite oat heavy, and it also relies on the Citra hop, which is one of the American classic high alpha acid hops. 14% alpha acid gives you this lovely big kind of juicy mango character. Quite often a little bit of a sharper peach and more pungent passion fruit, and you can often get like lemon limey characteristics out of this one as well. But yeah, let's get on then and have a little look at this. I'm really curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. So yeah, this is the Hammock, a 9% New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. Our first beer from New Trail Brewing in Pennsylvania. So let's get this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. So yeah, this should be really quite nice actually. I have to say it's poured pretty much as you would expect from a New England IPA of pretty much any description. So yeah, before the head on this one disappears, you can see that the beer is poured with about a half to maybe 2/3 finger of a bumpy, I would say, yeah, I'd say that's a perfect white head, to be honest with you. I'm not sure how well you guys are going to see that on the camera. But yeah, not too much in the way of visible carbonation with this one. 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones going up toward the bottom of the head there. But overall, it looks pretty nice. One thing I also have to say about this beer as well is that for a 9%er, it's not the soupiest and gloopiest of New England IPAs that I've come across. So remember, in these beers, the level of haze depends on the oak content, wheat content, and to a degree what yeast you use. But yeah, this one is certainly not the soupiest and gloopiest that I've come across. The definition of a New England IPA, in my opinion, is that it contains a bit more oat and wheat, as well as the barley. West Coast IPAs tend to rely on barley malt for the most part for their malt bases. That would be the key sort of difference there. But yeah, it certainly looks the part of any New England IPA that you're going to come across. And to be honest, I don't think we really need to say much more about the appearance of this one. So we can go on and have a little look at the aroma of this beer before we get stuck into it. I'm really curious about this one. So yeah, let's do that then. Oh yeah, you can smell that this one is a bit of a beast. You can smell the booziness and the strength out of this right away. But it actually smells pretty solid, in fact. This is interesting. And for me, I think there's the water pipes going again in the basement. But yeah, I would say this is quite interesting for you. I've mentioned in a number of reviews how the American grains come across a little bit differently. So American wheat, generally speaking, is a little bit smoother than European wheat. But I think the American oats are just a little bit lighter, actually, than their European counterparts. Because this is supposed to be quite an oaty-leaning New England IPA. But in my opinion, it really doesn't come across like that. To me, if I was smelling this blind, I would think it was a little bit more sort of wheaty leaning and a bit more pungent. But then again, it is 9%, so it has a little bit more bite to it. But to be honest, it gives you everything you'd kind of expect of this. And as I've said, in New England IPAs, I think there are 6 ways that the malty, yeasty side of this beer can lean. So you can get your farmhousey kind of yeasty character, you can get your rye leaning grainy side of things, and those are a little bit more common in American brewed New England IPAs in my experience. But then you've got the wheaty bitiness, the oaty creaminess, the barley malt bread, and also the kind of sweeter side of things. And that is the way I think the European New England IPAs have evolved a little bit more in comparison to the American ones. So this beer for me strikes me as being a little bit more, from the aroma I would have said it was more wheaty leaning, more barley malt leaning. And yeah, it's quite interesting, this one. I do like beers that test your nose a little bit, and after nearly 4,000 sit-down reviews, that's kind of what we want, to be honest with you. But let's do as we always do. We'll break down the aroma of the beer and just describe it for you a little bit more in depth. So the backbone of this beer, as you would expect, is a lovely sort of fresh, white bready bread crust. You can smell that just forming the backbone of this beer. There's a little bit of a kind of woody character coming out of this one, and interestingly, I'm also getting quite a little bit of kind of Jacob's cream cracker out of this beer. For me, this is kind of interesting because I do get more and more yeasty character out of this beer the more that I smell of it, and compared to the European New England IPAs at 9-10%, generally speaking, they do get thicker and more creamier and oatier the further up the scale that you go. This one isn't doing that. So yeah, above the kind of Jacob's cream cracker sort of thing, you do get a little bit of that kind of fresh, wholemeal, brown bready character coming out of this beer. There's a good little bit of white bready character in this one as well. You can smell a little bit of a denser, wheaty white bread also. And at the back of the nose, I actually do get quite a little bit of that more wheaty, bitey pungency. That you do get a little bit of that kind of wheaty, bitey pungency that's that you would kind of associate with like a session IPA or something like that. For me, quite often session IPAs have a little bit more wheat in them, and that gives them the bitiness. But the thing is, the more that you smell of this beer, the more it kind of mellows out, and you start to get the oaty notes becoming more prominent in it. So that's a really interesting thing. And when it comes to New England IPAs, the oaty character is always an interesting thing to watch, because generally speaking, the smoother and creamier the oats are in these beers, the fresher the beer is, the drier they are, the older it is. And this beer I know is pretty fresh. I think Paul picked this one up from the brewery directly. So yeah, for me, you do get a little bit of that oaty, creamy note out of this one. There is a little bit of a drier oaty character out of it as well, sitting on top of the wheat. And as I say, a bit of wheaty bitiness into the back of the nose. This one isn't too sweet either. I mean, you do get a little bit of that Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy sort of thing coming out of it, but it's really, it really isn't all that prominent, to be honest with you. Just a little bit of that Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotch. Other than that, I don't know if we really need to say very much about the malty side of this beer and the yeasty side of things. So let's focus on the hoppy side of the beer. So, this one is interesting because it's got a very pungent green component. What you have to remember with IPAs is that there are 3 different kinds of hoppings that you can use. So you can use early addition hopping, which takes place usually within the first hour of the wort boil. That gives you mainly bitterness, and it will translate to quite a deep, dank aroma in the green component. You've got late addition hopping, which takes place in the last half hour of the wort boil. That translates to usually a brighter kind of green component, but then you also have, it'll also give you a little bit of bitterness, but a little mainly flavour and aroma. Then you've got dry hopping, which takes place after the wort boil is complete. That gives you pretty much all, flavour and aroma, and again it translates to a deeper, a sort of brighter green component. And you can get a lot of the bright green component in this one, but you do get a little bit of dankness in it, so it wouldn't be surprising if this beer had a little bit of early addition hopping to it. But generally speaking, West Coast IPAs use all 3 types of hopping, whereas New England hazy IPAs tend to rely on the latter 2, and so that's the reason why West Coast IPAs are a lot more bitter and smell a lot more kind of deep and dank. But with this beer, you do get you do get a little bit of earthiness out of this one. You've got a nice deep, dank floral aromaticity as well, but you do get some of the kind of spicier notes at the front of the nose, and you've got quite a little bit of a zesty, sort of grassy character coming out of this beer as well, which I think is really quite interesting. So that gets a big thumbs up from me. I really like how that all pieces together in this particular beer. So quite a pungent green component in this one. In terms of the fruity side of things then, which is to round off the aroma component of this video, for me, you do get a little bit of that stronger grapefruit. Citra is of course capable of giving you the grapefruit. Quite a little bit of a sharper kind of peachy character coming out of this one too. Some more pungent passion fruit sitting underneath. Lots of juicy mango notes in there. Yeah, very juicy mango note. You certainly have a little bit of a kind of apricot-y note and a little bit of pineapple in there as well. And yeah, the way that this beer goes about its fruity side is really nice. But there's certainly a good little bit of lemon lime coming out of this one as well. So yeah, I really do like how that all just kind of pieces together in this beer actually. So yeah, just as I always say, take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it, but I think it is about time that we try this one and see what it's all about. So yeah, this is the Hammock, a 9% New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA from New Trail Brewing Company in Williamsport in central Pennsylvania. Another very kind donation to the channel by Paul Rameli of PA Brew News. Let's get stuck in. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Ooh, that's really nice actually. This is quite different to any sort of New England double that I've had in recent times, and after nearly 4,000 reviews, this is what you want. You want beers that are going to kind of test your palate a little bit and make you think about what you're drinking, and this beer certainly does that. Yeah, I really do like how this just kind of pieces together actually. First off, I would say it surprises me that this is as oaty leaning as they say. I would have thought this was a more barley malt and wheat leaning New England Double IPA, because it does have quite a little bit of bite to it. It's got quite a little bit of booziness. And yeah, maybe it doesn't have all that much wheat in it. Maybe it is leaning more toward the oaty side of things. Maybe it's just oat and barley. But yeah, this is quite different to other beers that I've had in a similar category, and like I say, you do get a bit of booziness out of this. So yeah, interesting stuff actually. Let's break this beer down then and just describe it a bit more in depth for you, as we always do. It does sweeten up and smoothen up a little bit though, the more that you drink of it. I think that's fair to say. You start to get more and more creaminess out of this beer the further into the aftertaste that you go. So, middle third of your palate, if we start there, you get a lovely little bit of a kind of fresh, white bready bread crust coming out of the beer. Further forward on that middle third of the palate, there's a little touch of like woodiness coming out of it. You've also got this really nice kind of slightly crackery character as well, which I do enjoy. So yeah, nice little bit of the crackery note, I think, fades away. This beer actually does get, the more that you drink of it, the more kind of creamy and smooth it gets, rather than anything else. So yeah, you've got your bread crust, you've got your little bit of woodiness there, there's a little bit of crack, there's a sort of layer of crackery character. You do get a layer of a slightly dense and sweet wholemeal brown bready character in the base. Then above that you get a lighter white bready character, which I also think is really nice. So yeah, the brown bread and the white berry layers that you get in this one are actually very sweet. And it's interesting with this one, I do wonder if they've got a bit of wheat in this. This is the thing about American breweries. I don't think they're obliged to tell you what degrees are, what ingredients, sorry, are in their beers, whereas in Europe you are. So yeah, because wheat, obviously you've got all these kind of gluten intolerances and things like that, so that's a little bit surprising. But anyway, it's interesting with this beer because above what is quite obviously a barley malt white bready layer, it's a bit hard to tell. You can feel the oats sitting above that, which are really quite dense, but I don't feel this kind of wheaty layer actually. And usually with the wheat, the American wheat, as I say, is very smooth and sort of densifies out the bready character a bit more. You don't get that. This beer is, for a 9%er, compared to other American IPAs that I've had when I've been over here, this is really quite light in terms of its mouthfeel. So this has got me thinking quite a little bit. But yeah, above that kind of white bready layer, you can feel the more dense oaty notes coming out of this. And the oaty character is quite interesting. I've always said oaty character is usually an indicator of how fresh your New England IPA is. You know, the creamier the oats smell and taste, the fresher the beer is, the drier they are, the older the beer is. And with this one, it's kind of interesting because they're so dense. If you go down that middle line of your palate, you can feel the really dense and slightly sweet oaty character coming out of this one. But as you move out toward the sides of your palate, it gives you a little bit of a more kind of grassy, sorry, not a bit grassy note, it gives you a little bit more of a kind of dry oaty character before you reach the sort of grassy floral parts on the side of your palate there. So that's quite interesting with this one, but it's not overly dry in terms of its notey notes, but this is a very light-bodied New England double, especially when you consider that it's 9% compared to others that I've had. On top of the oaty layer then, you've got this little circle in the middle of your tongue, which is really quite sweet. So it's quite like a Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy sort of thing. Then in the dead centre of your tongue, you maybe have like a straight-up caramel coming out of this beer, and that's quite interesting too. Maybe above all of that, you get a very slight biscuity, cookie type note out of the beer. But again, it's quite minimal in terms of the biscuity note, I would say. For me, it's more like a concentrated Werther's Original butter candy butterscotch, and that is, of course, covering the alcohol in this beer, 100%. At that point, I think we've, yeah, at that point, I think we've covered everything we need to say about the middle third of your palate. So remember that generally speaking, further forward on your palate, you're going to get the sweeter flavours. Further back on the palate, you're going to get the drier and more bitter flavours. And compared to the middle third of your palate, the back third of your palate is going to give you similar flavours, just at different intensities. But yeah, on that border region between middle and back third of your palate, you get a little bit of a kind of more brown bready character in the base, then you get a softer white bready character on top of that. But the base of that back third of your palate is the bread crust. It's a little bit drier, of course. Then you get the sort of crackery, the dry crackery notes on top of that. You've also got that fluffy kind of wholemeal brown bready character on top of that, and that's taller and more airy, of course. Then you've got that white bready character, which again is taller and more airy. I do wonder if there is a bit of wheat in this. I would love to know, because just above that you can feel this more dense, compact white bready character there, and it's just got a little bit of a kind of wheaty bitiness to it, and that lingers into the aftertaste as well. But above all of that, you've got a wee bit more of you do have a little bit more of a kind of yeasty character coming out of the beer, and you'll very often find this in these beers. So the yeasty character that you get in this one is like a really dense, sweet, doughy white bready character. There's a little bit of woodiness to it almost. I wouldn't call it particularly spicy, but it feels as if it's wrapped in like a little bit of kind of honeycomb and things. So you can feel all of that going on in this one. But that yeasty character, as I say, sits on top of the malty aspects of that back third of the palate. But definitely, back third of the palate feels taller. Then as you move forward into that middle third of your palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. And I think that describes the malty and yeasty side of this beer. Let's go on to the hoppy side of things then. I'm really curious about this. Now I get the feeling that this beer is using T90 pellets, because it's not, when it's single hop with Citra, you might expect them to use a little bit of like Incognito and Cryo and stuff like that, and that would give you a very smooth green component. But this one has a little bit more kind of bite to it and things like that, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, the way the green component goes together in this is really quite interesting. So let's just look at that. In the back corners of the palate, you've got a lovely little bit of you've got a little touch of earthy character there. As you move further forward, it gives you a little bit of herbal note, but then very quickly it becomes this quite deep, dank, floral aromaticity, and that makes me wonder if there's a little bit of early addition hopping going on here, because you do get a little bit of that deep, dank, sort of piney resin character going on. But as you move toward the kind of front corners of your palate, it gives you a little bit more of a floral aromatic spice, and then round the front curve of the tongue, it's distinctly lighter and more grassy, but a little touch more oily, and it's quite zesty in the way it goes together. But yeah, I think that covers everything we need to say about the green component. Let's focus on that front third of your palate now. So, the front third of your palate in this beer, it's actually very smooth and really quite sweet and almost creamy and juicy in a sense. It's really interesting. The front third of your palate is the thing that really makes you think, yeah, this is a more oak-forward IPA. I have to say that about it. So yeah, that border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a nice little bit of bready build-up in there, a little bit of brown bread in the base, the white bread on top. Then the base of that front third of your palate, you've got the soft white bready bread crust, little touch of the kind of smoother brown bread in there, the white bready character as well. Then on top of that you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So let's look at the fruity side of things. I will say it kind of gives you what you would expect of Citra, and it's kind of showing the softer side of Citra, I would say, as well. Like at the back of that front third of your palate, you do get a little hint of that deep kind of citrusy, zesty grapefruit, And as you move further forward, you get the kind of softer passion fruit, but still quite pungent. You get a bit of that peachy character as well. Then you've got a really like ripe, mangoey character out of this one, which kind of stands out. And as you reach the middle of that front third of your palate, you can feel like the soft apricot and papaya underneath, and the juicier pineapple on top. And as you move further forward into the as you move further forward into the kind of front half of that front third of your palate, you get a bit more. You can feel there's a little bit of that kind of lychee, gooseberry sort of thing that Citra can sometimes show. It shows that a little bit more in West Coast IPAs, right enough, but you do get a wee bit of that kind of lemony, limey character coming out of the beer as well, particularly as you move toward the front tip of your tongue, where you're getting those more zesty, grassy characteristics coming out of it. But all in all, the flavour of this beer, it's quite interesting. It's not, when it said it was an oaty leaning New England IPA, I would have expected it to be a lot more kind of creamy and things like that. But it's still nice. I do like the flavour of this one. I have to say that, but just not quite what I expected in terms of like body and things like that. I think at this point we can end the tasting section and move on to the mouthfeel to round off. So yeah, mouthfeel then. For me, mouthfeel-wise, this beer is, top end to mid-bodied. I wouldn't call it full-bodied. It's surprisingly light for a 9% Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. Carbonation is very smooth in this one. This is like a more wet and oily and slightly slick take on the New England Double IPA. In terms of IBUs, I think it's like 40, maybe 50 IBUs at a push, and with a double IPA you do expect it to be that little bit more bitter to kind of balance out the malty side of things. So that's definitely there. 40 or 50 IBUs, maybe 60 an absolute maximum, I think is fair for this one. The malt base has a little bit of dryness underneath, smoothness in the middle, and quite a bit of a kind of dry creaminess on top of that, with a wee bit of sweetness in there. Then the fruity side of the beer is quite oily. It's got a little bit of silkiness to it as well. But all in all, I think this is a really nice. It's a really nice double IPA. This one. It's made me think about the different aspects of things a wee bit more, and I think it kind of highlights the difference between European grains and American grains quite succinctly in some ways. It kind of shows you that the oats are maybe a little bit drier than the oats in Europe, and the wheat is definitely a little bit smoother. I'd be very curious to know if there is a little bit of wheat in this one. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. I think it's been a really interesting beer to try. So this was the Hammock, a 9% New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. My very first look at a beer from Trail Brewing Company in Williamsport in central Pennsylvania. Big thank you to Paul once again for making this review possible. I hope that he enjoyed this one, and I'm sure he'll comment and tell me whether he thought it was bad or not. But yeah, I think this was a really interesting beer to try as my first one. This just kind of caught my eye, and this was one of the ones that he recommended that I review as well. But thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from New Trail Brewing Company as well, and we will see about getting some more reviewed from this brewery over the next little while. They gave me quite a lot of cans to try from these guys, but I think I might only be able to fit in one or two while I'm here in the south of New Jersey. So we'll see how it goes. But thank you for watching. Check out my social media, check out New Trail social media, and do check out my very good friend Paul at PA Brew News. Until the next time, Slange, Skull, cheers. This was the Hammock from New Trail Brewing Company, a 9% New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. Cheers just now.